Are you ready?
I was born to do this stuff.
I believe it.
Welcome to the Thoughts on Digital podcast, ideas and insight about the ever-changing world of digital marketing.
How's it going, everybody? My name's Adam Levine, and today I'm sitting down with Rob Spierenburg, CEO and co-founder of All Things Media, and today we're talking about on-demand education. All Things Media has been in the education space, whether it's working with companies like McGraw-Hill or Pearson Education for roughly about 20 years.
Yeah, since the beginning.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've got a pretty good understanding of where things have been and where things are going. So how you doing, Rob?
I'm good, Adam. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Yeah, you ready to do this?
I am. I'm all ready. Let's get into it. Let's talk about where
on-demand
things,
education.
Yeah, well, where things are going, right? So the landscape has shifted, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
From the traditional classroom where someone just speaks at, the class and people take notes, to something a lot more broad and a lot more
fluid,
immersive.
Yeah, I think if you look back over the past 20 years that we've been doing this, we've really engaged with education in every different aspect. We've developed for the educators. We started building companion CDs for textbooks and trying to augment the content in textbooks with like companion websites and things like that. We moved into corporate education and training for a lot of major automotive manufacturers, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, to name a few, or a couple, I guess, but there's plenty more.
Sure.
And then we've also done everything in between. And I think that what we're finding now, or what we've seen over the past 20 years, is the same thing that you're seeing in video, the same thing that you're seeing everywhere, which is the idea that people are no longer willing to tune into a broadcast or to wrap their schedule and their habits and their behaviors around the schedule and habits and behaviors of those that are putting the content out. Mm-hmm. So in the same way that in video, you've seen people unwilling to go to the movie theater, although, there's still plenty of attendance there, but unwilling to go to the TV at a specific time, starting with DVR, and this increase of on-demand video, the same way that you've seen that happen in the video space, you're seeing the same thing happen in education. You're seeing the same thing happen pretty much everywhere.
Sure.
Education's particularly interesting, though, because if you look at the history of education, it's almost coming full circle. And it sounds a little weird when I say it, but bear with me. So early on, there's kind of two primary types of education. One was the oration, right? Like, ancient Greece, guy stands in front of a group of people and just talks, drops some science, and everybody's like, wow, this guy knows what he's talking about. And then they go and they talk about it and they think about it. Right. And then they come up with their own theories and then they stand in front of a group of people. And that's essentially where kind of the typical classroom came from. The other type of education that was going on back then is apprenticeship. You got a blacksmith or a tradesman.
Right.
He brings somebody else in. He teaches them how to do it. They learn by doing. So there was learn by doing and learn by oration or traditional just dictation.
Sure.
And I think it remained largely unchanged from then until really recent history. I mean, obviously there was new tools that were brought in. There's new, video was another thing that was brought in. But again, that's disseminated information for people to sit and be a passive.
At its core, observer. The techniques have been the same.
Yeah, the general principle. And what we're seeing now, and what we've seen over the past 10 to 15 years, is this kind of very dramatic shift. I mean, 15 years feels like a long time, but not when you look back to ancient Greece.
Right.
This pretty interesting shift, right? So education largely did move away from more of the tradesman-focused thing over time. In specific trades, high-risk trades, you saw, the apprenticeship continue, which is, doctors and anywhere where a mistake would be too costly to risk it.
Right.
You saw a lot more of that hands-on apprenticeship
training,
happening, right, in some form or another.
Right.
But in the classroom, it remained very much the same. Teacher stands in front of the class. The kids have the books. They read what's there, and they go over it together, and they take a test to prove that they absorbed what was there.
Right.
With the emergence of the new technology that's been coming out over the past years, and also kind of a radical rethinking in the education space of what people actually learn, like what actually sticks with someone. We've seen this huge kind of change over the past 20 years. So let's talk a little bit about what that change is.
Yeah.
There is an increased emphasis on blended learning. And blended learning, for lack of, in a very simplified definition, is the idea of on-demand learning. It's the idea that people learn where they want to learn, when they want to learn, and to a certain extent, how they want to learn. So,
Right, because blended learning also encompasses other tools beyond the classroom, like
Exactly.
online material or, video material or just things that are not just a textbook.
and it's available to people where they want to learn it.
Right.
So these online classrooms, these online universities, mobile phones now becoming a big part of that. It's on their schedule more or less. And there's probably key benchmarks, but what they learn in between those benchmarks, it's kind of on their schedule how they attack it
Sure.
and where they go. And so what you're seeing with blended learning and what you're seeing with learning in general is a shift from the teacher dictating what you learn and when you learn it and how you learn it and what's important, to the students starting to kind of guide the learning process. And the way that they do that, or one of the ways that we've been successful in doing that, is this idea of kind of a tiered entry level or kind of a low barrier of entry, a zero degree entry into the pool of learning. The idea there is that you start with stuff that's more visually engaging, quick hit, very high level points. Then you give the student the option to dig deeper. Maybe they dig a little bit deeper, and then you go to this tier where it's visual and kind of information is more balanced.
Right.
And then you have a deeper dive that goes into just blocks of information and long-form content. And what that allows us to do is to create really compelling visual education experiences that students can look at to kind of get their bearing, and then give the student the option to decide to engage with the deeper dive into the content. And what you find when you do that is that the student is more engaged. The student is more apt to learn because they're actively engaging in the learning process.
Right. They're making
choosing.
a choice. Right.
Exactly. Traditionally, in education, too, there's this principle that we've been fighting to kind of get people away from over years, this thought process that you can take a pool of water and if you pour it on a glass, the glass is going to take all of that water. The reality is the age of the 1 hour e-learning course is quickly evaporating. The hour-long text-based dictation, a couple of images, and a few evaluations, that type of e-learning format is quickly starting to fall apart, and it's falling apart for a couple of reasons. One, human beings have a hard time retaining large blocks of information in a single sitting. You can get 3 learning objectives in, you can get some key points in, but if you throw a 1 hour, dictation at someone, they may take away some of the stuff that you want, but the chances of them taking away all of the important information that you threw into that 1 hour session are way less.
Right. It's just too much.
Yeah. Whereas in a 15-hour session, they have time to take it in. You can quickly hit a few key points, and then they can disengage from the learning session, and what they've learned isn't buried under more stuff that they're learning.
Right. They can actually take time to absorb what they've learned.
Exactly. And so this more is more ideology that education has kind of labored under, this library of information in a single course, cram as much in there as you can, is quickly starting to go, or quickly, I would say, not as quick as it should, but
Right.
It's starting to kind of go away in favor of these quicker hits. And so on the one side, it's a better way to educate. On the other side, this whole change hasn't come around because people just realized it was a better way to learn. The impetus for all of this has been the fact that people in general are becoming accustomed to this on-demand lifestyle.
Right.
This on-demand lifestyle, video is a very clear example.
Right.
Fast food is another example. Anything that
Sure.
you look about in society in general that's happening right now is the idea of, I don't want to say instant gratification because that sounds wrong.
Yeah.
It has a negative connotation
Right.
to it, but control. Control shifting from the people that want to give you advertisements, that want you to walk into a car dealership and walk you through this sales process, the people that want to kind of control your path, to the user now increasingly wanting to and having the power to control their path in pretty much every engagement that they have. It's kind of a power to the people, decentralization ideal, and it's way higher level and more profound and deep than what we typically talk about, but it is a fundamental shift, societal shift that we've been seeing happening over the past 20 years, and that shift affects every area of the business that we do. And when you look back at it, when you connect the dots going back, it was inevitable from the moment that the World Wide Web started,
Right.
was created.
As soon as everyone became connected, and it just, it increased,
Yeah, as soon as information was available to everybody, the
Yep.
on-demand culture that we're now seeing really starting to proliferate was inevitable. It's inevitable that human beings, if given the option, will want to choose their own path. Everybody, or the vast majority of people, feel that they are better suited to
make their own decisions,
dictate their
Sure.
fate in any instance
Sure.
than some guy high up there in a chair. And
Right.
so we're going to see a lot more of this happening. We're going to see a lot more of it happen in education. And it's very interesting when you look at the role of the teacher, right? Because the guy used to stand up there in front of the class and orate. Now what happens? Now how does the teacher still fit into the equation?
I mean, I look at that like, an opportunity for the teacher to, pre-plan out their lessons like they would, but then record their lessons, right? So they don't necessarily need to, you can still have that classroom setting, but you've got students that don't need to be there that can, you say, okay, well, the test is going to be on this, so-and-so day. Let's say if you still want to have that traditional model, but you can now have, the test is a month out. You've got between now and then to either watch all these videos on your own time or come to the lectures or both.
Yeah, which is kind of a college. So you're thinking college.
I'm thinking that could, this is a huge shift.
Translate to high school.
It really could, but then you're also getting into at what age are you responsible enough to do that? Do you wind up with people, the fear there is you've got a lot of kids who are maybe going to flunk that otherwise would have maybe passed, but
because they've been forced into the structure and the way of thinking.
But here's the rub. Did they learn anything when they were forced into it? Okay, so they remembered something for a night so they could pass a test the next day, but did they retain that?
Yeah. I think
they can pass,
I
but
think
what's
the
it worth?
traditional classroom isn't going to go away.
Yeah.
I think what we see, at least in the K through 12, at least not for the short term.
Sure.
What we're going to see happen in K through 12 is the instructor or the teacher is going to go from standing in front of the class and writing on a chalkboard to actually sitting side by side with the students and helping to kind of guide them through this process of self-learning, teaching them the skills that they need to identify what information is important and what information is of interest and what's really going to benefit them. Still allowing the student to select their path, but helping to facilitate the environment. You think about it like this. There's, a lifeguard and then there's a swim instructor. The lifeguard just sits there and watches and makes sure that nobody's running by the pool and everybody's following the rules.
Right.
The swim instructor actually takes them into the pool and shows them how to swim. And the pool, at the end of the day, is this wide collection of educational resources that exist. Up until now, the pool's been very rigid, and it's been, this is what's there, and you've got to swim in exactly this way, and you can only be in this part of the pool. Well, now that pool is becoming completely fluid, pun intended.
I see what you did there.
Where there's going to be so many resources available to the instructor that even within the curriculums that they're already buying, example, McGraw-Hill. We just built augmented reality and video augmentation to their existing textbook curriculum that allows somebody, if somebody wants to, they can just do the textbook. But if they read the textbook, but if they want more, they want to get more out of it, a more experiential thing, they pick up an augmented reality application and they point at the textbook and they can bring up a 3D model of a figure in the textbook and engage with it and break it apart and experience it and experiment on it.
Right. I think it's interesting also that the first entry point into what we built for like McGraw, putting a layer of AR on top of an existing book because that's what they had, right? That made sense as a first entry point.
This is the bridge.
This is the bridge because the next step is really to work with the education companies in developing the book, in developing the content, or in developing how that works because there could be not just, okay, so this is an interesting deeper dive into this one section based on, a photograph that's in the book versus part of the curriculum that was built around a virtual environment.
The whole idea of the book is very much, akin to the idea of a massive, e-learning course, right? That, think about it like this. You have an e-learning course that's 10 hours long.
Sure.
Okay, nobody's ever going to do that at a single sitting.
Right.
So you come in, you take part of it, a chapter of it, or one little section of it, and then you leave and you come back and you pick it up somewhere else. What's the value in that? Why not de-aggregate that into a bunch of smaller 15-minute courses that give you that key takeaway? you walk away with it, you come back, you take another one, and they're deaggregated so that you can really focus just on the one little thing. You don't have to have the whole course. And I think that's something we're seeing happening in education, where this large, thick textbook has so much information in it, but some of the teachers or some of the curriculums or some of the school systems only want to teach small bits of it. So I think we're going to see that book broken apart, and I think we're going to see smaller, more discrete packets of information disseminated with a lot more digital tools and digital augmentation behind it.
Yeah.
Right? Rather than a big book with like a couple digital tools scattered here and there.
Exactly.
You're going to see a smaller book with a lot more of the digital content, a lot more video support, a lot more simulations, a lot more AR and all these other technologies. So we've kind of talked about the going from the Greek guy standing in the oration in his robes,
Right.
having a great time talking about, theology or whatever, and everybody's sitting around and listening, and where that's going. So that's the traditional classroom to kind of our more flex and modern classroom, what's happening there. But at the same time, back then there was also some guy hammering away on an anvil learning in this apprenticeship.
In the trades.
So what's happening with that? Apprenticeships for kind of the less critical stuff, they're still there, but anything that you needed to physically do or interact with is still there, but a lot of it, isn't as common in learning, and I think it hasn't been as common in learning over the years because it's costly,
Right.
and it's a commitment, and there's still trade schools and things like that are there, but it's not this type of real world experience is not always available, especially in like the K through 12 level, and especially at a low cost because it's a costly thing to do.
Sure.
And so what we're going to see now happening, and what we're already seeing happening now, is this explosion of simulations. VR and augmented reality are going to give you the ability to simulate a lot of these experiences with all of the variables that you would engage in real life, but without the risk associated with failure. Because the two things that stop you from doing a simulation is cost and the risk of failure. Right. And so for a doctor that's training in school, they go through all of these hours of training and learning. Then they go into an apprenticeship and they slowly work their way, residency,
Sure.
and slowly work their way up to being able to do it on their own, to fly solo. And I think there'll always be some of that in there. But I think that earlier on in the process, when we're doing all of this text-based learning and testing and quizzing and all of that stuff, I think we're going to see simulations inserted into that process so that by the time they get to their residency, they will have already experienced so many hours of simulated VR-based procedures. And the best way to learn, one of the best ways to learn, and I think you're going to see this in a lot of education TED Talks and education speakers and methodologies out there, is failure. Failure is the greatest teacher of all. The problem is when you're trying to learn how to do open heart surgery, failure is you can't walk away from that saying, well, the guy died, but I learned something. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
And so that's why simulations are so key.
Right.
And these immersive VR-based and augmented reality-based simulations are going to give students the ability to fail in a safe environment.
Without risk.
To see the repercussions of this and versus that, and to execute those super critical trial and error decisions and critical decisions without the associated risk of that failure up front before they get into a position where they're put in that situation.
Sure.
And they have to make a decision. They will have already been in that situation and potentially made the wrong decision, but nobody died. And now they're in that situation again, and they know what to do. Right. And that's the power of simulation, and the added power of it is it's going to be available to you on your mobile device. So it's the great equalizer. Because again, it comes back to money too. We like to think that education is this, and education is a very bold and noble endeavor. But at the end of the day, there's still business behind it, and traditionally, there have been a lot of communities and low-income school districts that have been underserved by the educational system that we have in place. But now, with the rise and ubiquity of smartphones and the increasing, immersive nature of these simulations and AR and VR tools, suddenly experiences that were once completely reserved for people in a wealthy school district are going to be available to everybody. Maybe you have a virtual
Sure.
frog dissection on a phone or a tablet.
Right.
You're getting a level of the experience that you might have only gotten in a school district that had the money to buy a bunch of frogs.
Right.
Or you can take a field trip to Paris when you could never, and get a sense of key historical, landmarks,
Sure.
or look at the museums there without having to spend the money on the ticket. Some people may never go there, but at least on some level, they'll be able to experience and learn from other cultures and other places.
I think that's great too, because you open the door to so many people that might not have otherwise had an opportunity.
In these modern times,
Yeah.
when getting 1 minute of a person's time is hard,
Mm-hmm.
education is evolving to serve that need. And the reality is, man, I think people are going to learn more. I think it is going to be better. We're going to have
Sure.
smarter, maybe not smarter, but we're going to have people that come away with more information than they would have. And that's the name of the game today,
Yeah.
is how quickly can we get this information in their heads so they can move on to something else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that that puts a fine point on it. I think that's a good summation of where things are going.
All right, so let's we're gonna get back to the workshop and
Yep.
and start cramming some thoughts into people's heads as quickly as possible. And we'll look forward to meeting you on the next one.
Excellent.
Right, Adam?
Sounds good to me.
All right.
Take care. Ideas always go further when they're shared. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a review on iTunes or drop us a comment on YouTube. Let us know what you think about today's topic. We'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week.